Publicly shamed for my embarrassing car, I walked away in silence, then set a trap. What unfolded at family dinner shocked her entire circle.
The garage door groaned open that Tuesday morning, revealing what I thought was just another ordinary day. I climbed into my 2018 Honda CR-V, the same reliable vehicle that had carried me through countless errands, doctor appointments, and weekly grocery runs for the past 6 years. The leather seats still smelled faintly of the vanilla air freshener Sarah had given me last Christmas, back when things between us were different, back when she still pretended to care about the thoughtful gifts I gave her family. I was heading to Michael and Sarah's house to drop off the birthday present I'd carefully selected for my granddaughter Emma's 7th birthday party. A hand-painted jewelry box I'd found at that little antique shop downtown, the one with intricate flowers carved into the mahogany lid. Emma loved collecting little treasures, and I knew she'd adore having a special place to keep them safe. What I didn't know was that I was about to witness something that would change everything between my son's wife and me forever. Something that would reveal her true character in the most shocking way possible. By the time I left their driveway 20 minutes later, I would understand exactly what kind of person Sarah really was. And more importantly, I'd know exactly what I needed to do about it. But before we dive into what happened that morning, let me paint you the full picture. Because what Sarah did wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. And the way this story unfolds, well, let's just say she got exactly what she deserved, but probably not in the way she expected. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 72 years old. I've been a widow for 8 years now, ever since my husband David passed from a sudden heart attack. Those first few years after losing him were the hardest of my life. David and I had been married for 38 years, and suddenly I was navigating everything alone. The house felt too big, too quiet, too empty without his laughter filling the rooms we'd shared for decades. That's when Michael, my only son, started insisting I move closer to his family. He and Sarah had just bought their dream house in Westfield, a beautiful suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and perfectly manicured lawns. They had 2 children, Emma and little Jake, and Michael painted this picture of grandparents' Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings where I'd be surrounded by family. It sounded perfect. After years of loneliness, the idea of being close to my grandchildren, of having a real purpose again, made my heart sing. So I sold the house David and I had built together, packed up 40 years of memories, and moved to a modest apartment just 15 minutes from Michael's house. Close enough to help when needed, far enough to maintain my independence. For the first year, everything seemed wonderful. I was the doting grandmother who picked up Emma from school when Sarah had her book club meetings. I babysat on date nights, helped with homework, and made my famous chocolate chip cookies for every school event. Sarah would call me when Jake had a fever, and she needed someone to watch Emma. I'd drop everything and rush over, grateful to be needed, grateful to be part of their lives. But gradually, things started to shift. The requests for help became expectations. The polite thank yous disappeared. Sarah's tone when she spoke to me grew shorter, more impatient, like I was an inconvenience rather than family. When I'd arrive to babysit, she'd already be heading out the door, barely acknowledging my presence beyond a quick list of instructions. I told myself it was just the stress of raising 2 young children. Sarah worked part-time at a marketing firm, and I knew juggling career and family was challenging. I made excuses for her behavior, convinced myself that deep down she appreciated everything I did for their family. The truth was, I was desperate to maintain my connection to Michael and the grandchildren. After David died, they were all I had left. So I swallowed every small slight, every dismissive comment, every moment when Sarah made me feel like I was intruding rather than helping. I convinced myself that family meant accepting people's flaws, that love meant being patient, even when patience felt impossible. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was, how I'd trained Sarah to treat me like a convenient service rather than a family member. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I smiled when she hurt my feelings, every time I prioritized keeping peace over demanding respect, I was teaching her that my dignity was negotiable. But that Tuesday morning, as I pulled into their circular driveway with Emma's birthday present carefully wrapped in the passenger seat, I had no idea that everything was about to change. I had no idea that Sarah's mask was about to slip completely, revealing the person she'd been hiding beneath all those forced smiles and fake pleasantries. The house looked picture perfect as always. Sarah had a gift for staging their life to look like something out of a home decorating magazine. The front lawn was emerald green without a single weed, bordered by perfectly trimmed hedges and seasonal flowers that she replaced every few months. The wraparound porch held matching wicker furniture with coordinated cushions, and hanging baskets overflowed with trailing petunias. Everything about their home screamed success and sophistication. Michael had done well for himself in commercial real estate, and Sarah made sure everyone knew it. She drove the latest model luxury SUV, wore designer clothes to the grocery store, and their children attended the most expensive private school in the district. Not that I judged them for their success. David and I had worked hard too, and we'd been comfortable in our own way. But where we'd been modest about our achievements, Sarah seemed to view wealth as a competition. She had a way of mentioning the cost of things, of name-dropping expensive brands, of making sure everyone understood exactly how much their lifestyle cost. I parked my CRV behind her gleaming white Escalade and gathered Emma's present from the passenger seat. The morning sun was bright and warm, promising a perfect day for a 7-year-old's birthday celebration. Through the front windows, I could see colorful balloons and streamers, evidence of the elaborate party Sarah had been planning for weeks. As I walked toward the front door, I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety I'd grown accustomed to when visiting their house. That subtle tension of never knowing what version of Sarah I'd encounter. Would she be the gracious hostess who welcomed me warmly? Or would she be the impatient woman who made me feel like I was interrupting something more important? I rang the doorbell and waited, listening to the sounds of children's laughter and adult conversation drifting from inside. Emma's birthday party was already in full swing, and I was looking forward to seeing my granddaughter's face light up when she opened her present. The door swung open, and Sarah appeared in a flowing sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect beach waves, her makeup flawless despite the chaos of hosting a children's party. She looked like she'd stepped off the pages of a lifestyle blog, every detail carefully curated to project effortless elegance. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of resigned tolerance. "You're here." Not hello or welcome or thank you for coming, just acknowledgement of my presence, like I was a delivery person she'd been expecting. But I'd learned to read between the lines of Sarah's communications, and today felt different. There was something in her expression, a tightness around her eyes, that suggested she was barely containing some kind of emotion. "Happy birthday to Emma," I said brightly, holding up the wrapped jewelry box. "I hope she loves it." Sarah glanced at the present with the kind of polite disinterest she'd perfected over the years. "I'm sure it's lovely. Come in, but try to keep it brief. We have a lot of guests today, and I don't want the children getting overstimulated." "Keep it brief, at my own granddaughter's birthday party." The word stung, but I pushed the hurt aside and followed her into the house. The living room had been transformed into a princess wonderland, with pink and purple decorations covering every surface. A dozen children ran around in party dresses and tiny suits, while their parents clustered in the kitchen, wine glasses already in hand despite it being barely noon. I spotted Emma immediately, resplendent in a tiara and flowing pink dress, surrounded by a mountain of presents that looked like they'd been purchased at the most expensive toy stores in the city. My modest jewelry box suddenly felt inadequate, but I reminded myself that it wasn't about the cost. It was about the thought, the love, the connection between grandmother and granddaughter. "Grandma Margaret!" Emma squealed when she saw me, breaking away from her friends to wrap her small arms around my waist. This was why I put up with Sarah's attitude. These moments with my grandchildren made every slight, every dismissive comment, every uncomfortable interaction worth enduring. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I have something special for you." But as I handed Emma her present, I noticed Sarah watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't the fond smile of a mother watching her child receive a gift from a loving relative. It was something colder, more calculating, like she was making mental notes about something. That should have been my first warning that this birthday party was going to be unlike any family gathering we'd ever had. That Sarah was building toward something, planning something that would change our relationship forever. But in that moment, surrounded by the chaos of a children's party, watching Emma's excited face as she felt the weight of her present through the wrapping paper, I was still the naive grandmother who believed that family love could overcome any obstacle. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, Sarah would reveal exactly what she thought of me, my car, and my place in their family. And I certainly had no idea that her revelation would set in motion a chain of events that would teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. Emma tore into the wrapping paper with the unbridled enthusiasm that only 7-year-olds possess. her eyes growing wide when she saw the intricate mahogany jewelry box. She traced the carved flowers with her small finger, clearly enchanted by the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful, Grandma Margaret. Look, it has a tiny ballerina inside that spins when you open it." She wound the small key and watched in delight as the delicate figure pirouetted to a gentle melody. Several of the other parents gathered around to admire the gift, commenting on the beautiful woodwork and asking where I'd found such a unique piece. For a moment, I felt proud, validated in my choice. This was exactly the reaction I'd hoped for. But Sarah's response cut through my satisfaction like a blade through silk. "How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's very vintage. I'm sure Emma will find somewhere to put it." She said the word vintage, like it was synonymous with outdated or worthless, her tone making it clear that she considered my gift a charitable donation, rather than a thoughtful present. The other parents shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but not quite understanding its source. I felt heat creep up my neck, that familiar burn of embarrassment that Sarah had become so skilled at inflicting. But I forced a smile and focused on Emma's genuine joy, reminding myself that her happiness was what mattered. "Well, I should let you get back to the party," I said, starting to gather my purse. I'd learned over the years that extended visits often led to more opportunities for Sarah to make me feel unwelcome. "Actually, Margaret," Sarah said, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something. "Since you're here, would you mind running to the store? We're running low on ice, and I can't leave in the middle of the party." Of course, not "would you mind helping us out?" or "could I ask a favor?" Just the assumption that I would drop everything to handle her oversight. But what struck me wasn't the request itself, it was what happened next. "You can take my car," she continued, dangling her keys with an air of generosity that felt more like condescension. "It'll be faster than walking to yours." That's when I realized she hadn't actually seen my car yet. I'd parked behind her Escalade, and the circular driveway meant my CRV was partially hidden from the house's main windows. Sarah had no idea what I was driving. "That's okay," I said politely. "My car is right here. It'll just take a few minutes." Sarah followed me toward the front door, chattering about party logistics and the challenges of hosting 12 children. But as we stepped onto the porch, her voice died mid-sentence. She'd spotted my Honda CRV, and her expression transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undisguised contempt. "Margaret," she said slowly, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard her use, "please tell me you didn't drive that thing to my daughter's birthday party." I looked at my car, trying to see it through her eyes. Yes, it was 6 years old. Yes, it had a few minor dings from parking lot encounters. But it was clean, well-maintained, and completely reliable. It had served me faithfully through every season, every errand, every emergency. "It's a good car, Sarah. It's never given me any trouble." She laughed then, not a polite chuckle or an amused giggle, but a harsh, mocking sound that carried across the perfectly manicured lawn. Several of the party guests who'd spilled onto the porch turned to see what was so funny. "Good car?" Sarah's voice rose with each word, her laughter becoming more pronounced. "Margaret, that's a soccer mom minivan from 2018. Do you have any idea how that looks parked in front of our house? What our neighbors are going to think?" The words hit me like physical blows. I could feel the stares of the other parents, could see the mixture of embarrassment and curiosity on their faces. Some looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing such a public humiliation. Others watched with the morbid fascination people have for car accidents. "Sarah, please," I said quietly, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated further. "It's just a car." But Sarah was just getting started. Something had unleashed itself in her, some long-suppressed disdain that was now pouring out unchecked. "Just a car?" She gestured dramatically toward my CRV like it was evidence in a criminal trial. "Margaret, I drive a 2024 Cadillac Escalade. Michael drives a BMW X5. We live in Westfield Heights, where image matters. And you show up to my daughter's birthday party in a vehicle that belongs in the parking lot of a discount grocery store." Each word was carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage, delivered with surgical precision to destroy my dignity in the most public way possible. I could feel my face burning with shame, could hear the whispered conversation starting among the other guests. "I think my car is perfectly fine," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. Sarah's laughter reached a new peak of cruelty. "Perfectly fine. Margaret, That car is what people buy when they've given up on life. When they've accepted that mediocrity is good enough. It's the automotive equivalent of surrender. She paused, looking around at her audience of horrified party guests, clearly enjoying having a captive crowd for her performance. Do you know what I told Michael when he said you were moving closer to us? I said, I hope your mother understands that we have standards to maintain. And then you show up to important family events in a vehicle that screams, I shop at thrift stores and clip coupons. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing that something significant was happening on the porch. I could see Emma through the window, her little face pressed against the glass, confusion clouding her features as she watched her grandmother being publicly eviscerated by her mother. Sarah, one of the other mothers said softly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this had taken. Maybe we should— No, Jennifer, Sarah cut her off, her voice sharp with authority. I think it's important that everyone understands something here. This is what happens when people don't recognize their place in the social hierarchy, when they think that showing up is enough, regardless of how inappropriate their presence might be. She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with a malice I'd never seen before. Margaret, I've been patient with you for years, patient with your outdated clothes, your bargain hunting mentality, your complete inability to understand that presentation matters. But this, she gestured again toward my car, this is where I draw the line. You cannot continue to embarrass our family with your refusal to maintain even basic standards. The words kept coming, each one more devastating than the last. Sarah had clearly been storing up these grievances for years, and now she was unleashing them all at once, using my car as the catalyst for expressing every resentment she'd been harboring. Do you know what the neighbors are going to say when they see that eyesore in our driveway? Do you understand how this reflects on Michael's professional reputation? He works in commercial real estate, Margaret. Image is everything in his business, and you're sabotaging his success with your determination to live like someone who's given up. I stood there, frozen by the sheer viciousness of her attack, unable to process how quickly this had escalated from a simple birthday party visit to a public character assassination. The woman I'd been trying so hard to please, the daughter-in-law I'd bent over backward to accommodate, was revealing her true feelings about me in the most humiliating way possible. But what happened next would prove that Sarah had made the biggest mistake of her life. Because while she was busy destroying my dignity in front of a dozen witnesses, she was also revealing something about herself that would come back to haunt her in ways she never could have imagined. You see, what Sarah didn't know was that my seemingly modest Honda CR-V was about to become the instrument of her own downfall. And the lesson she was about to learn would cost her far more than the price of any luxury vehicle she'd ever owned. But what Sarah didn't realize in that moment of cruel triumph was that she'd just made a catastrophic error. Because while she stood there, publicly humiliating me in front of her carefully curated social circle, she was about to discover that appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. You see, there was something about my 2018 Honda CR-V that Sarah didn't know. Something that would turn her moment of superiority into the most expensive mistake of her privileged life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly what happened next, because the way this unfolded was nothing short of poetic justice. As Sarah's laughter echoed across the perfectly manicured lawn, I felt something inside me shift. Not break, not crumble, but crystallize into something harder and more focused than I'd felt in years. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it was growing something I hadn't experienced since David died. Purpose. You're absolutely right, Sarah, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. Image does matter, and you've just shown everyone here exactly who you really are. Her laughter faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, emboldened by her audience and drunk on her own cruelty. Oh, Margaret, don't try to turn this around. Everyone can see exactly what's happening here. You're embarrassed because you finally got called out for your complete lack of standards. She gestured grandly toward the assembled parents, most of whom were now studying their shoes or finding sudden interest in their wine glasses. I mean, look around you. Do you see anyone else here who would show up to a child's birthday party in a vehicle that belongs in a junkyard? That's when Jennifer Morrison, a soft-spoken woman I'd met at a few school events, cleared her throat uncomfortably. Sarah, I think maybe— What, Jennifer? You think I'm being too harsh? Sarah's voice took on that particular edge she used when she felt challenged. Look, I know everyone here is too polite to say it, but somebody needs to tell Margaret the truth. This is Westfield Heights, not some strip mall in the suburbs. We have standards here. She turned back to me, her face flushed with the excitement of someone who'd finally found an outlet for years of suppressed disdain. Margaret, I've tried to be patient with you. I really have. When you wear those discount store outfits to school events, I bite my tongue. When you bring homemade cookies instead of ordering from the bakery everyone else uses, I smile and pretend it's charming. But this car situation is where I draw the line. The other parents were shifting uncomfortably now, clearly recognizing that Sarah had crossed from social correction into something much uglier. But she was too intoxicated by her own performance to notice the changing mood of her audience. Do you know what Michael's colleagues are going to think when they see that eyesore parked in front of our house? Do you understand how this affects his professional reputation? Image matters in commercial real estate, Margaret. Everything matters: the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the way you present yourself to the world. I could see Emma's face in the window, her small features twisted with confusion as she watched her mother attack her beloved grandmother. That sight sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I kept my voice level. I understand perfectly, Sarah. You're worried about what people will think. Exactly. She seemed relieved that I was finally grasping her point. Finally, you get it. Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but someone needs to explain reality to you. In neighborhoods like this, perception is everything. When you show up in a car that screams, "I've given up on life," it reflects on all of us. She paused dramatically, clearly enjoying having a captive audience for her lecture on social hierarchy. I mean, what's next? Are you going to start shopping at garage sales and wearing clothes from thrift stores? Are you going to show up to Emma's school events looking like someone who can't afford to maintain basic standards? The irony was so perfect, I almost smiled. Because what Sarah didn't know was that I could afford to maintain any standards I wanted. What she didn't know was that the car she was mocking so viciously was actually worth more than her precious Escalade. What she didn't know was that she just publicly humiliated herself in front of everyone who mattered to her social standing. But I wasn't ready to reveal that information yet. Not here, not now, not in front of Emma's birthday party guests. Sarah had chosen the time and place for this confrontation, but I would choose the time and place for her education. You know what, Sarah? I said, pulling my car keys from my purse with deliberate slowness. You're absolutely right about image mattering, and you've just given me a very clear picture of exactly who you are. Something in my tone must have penetrated her euphoria, because her expression flickered for just a moment. But she recovered quickly, too committed to her performance to back down now. Good. I'm glad we finally understand each other. Maybe now you'll consider upgrading to something more appropriate for someone associated with our family. Something that won't embarrass Michael at his company events. I walked toward my car, very aware of the audience watching this exchange unfold. Every step felt deliberate, purposeful, like I was walking toward something important rather than away from something painful. Oh, I'll definitely be making some changes, I said, opening my driver's door. Thank you for being so honest about how you really feel, Sarah. It's been incredibly enlightening. As I settled into my seat and started the engine, I could see Sarah basking in what she believed was her moment of triumph. She'd finally put the embarrassing mother-in-law in her place, finally established the social boundaries she'd been wanting to enforce for years. But as I backed out of their driveway, I was already planning my next move. Because Sarah had just made the most expensive mistake of her life, and she didn't even know it yet. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of righteous anger and growing determination. Sarah's words echoed in my mind, each cruel comment adding fuel to a fire that had been building for years. But underneath the hurt and humiliation was something else entirely, a sense of clarity I hadn't felt since David died. For years, I'd been trying to earn Sarah's approval, bending myself into impossible shapes to fit into her vision of what a proper mother-in-law should be. I'd swallowed countless small humiliations, made excuses for her behavior, convinced myself that family meant accepting people's flaws. But what had happened at Emma's birthday party wasn't about flaws, it was about character. And Sarah had just shown me exactly who she really was, underneath all that designer clothing and carefully curated social media presence. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, my hands surprisingly steady as I began making phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor, Patricia Chen, who'd been managing my investments since David passed away. Margaret, how lovely to hear from you. How are you doing? I'm doing very well, Patricia. I need to discuss some changes to my investment strategy. We talked for nearly an hour about liquidating certain positions, about moving money around, about preparations I needed to make for what was coming next. Patricia asked few questions, but I could hear the curiosity in her voice. In 8 years of working together, I'd never made requests like these. The second call was to my attorney, Robert Martinez, who'd handled David's estate and had become something of a family friend over the years. Margaret, what can I do for you today? Robert, I need to discuss some estate planning changes. Specifically, I need to understand my options regarding gifts to family members. Another long conversation, this one filled with legal terminology and tax implications. Robert, like Patricia, seemed intrigued by the sudden shift in my planning, but he was too professional to pry into my motivations. The third call was the most important one. I dialed the number I'd memorized years ago, but had never had reason to use. Premium Auto Concierge. This is David speaking. Hello, David. This is Margaret Chen. I believe you have something that belongs to me. There was a pause, then the sound of computer keys clicking. Mrs. Chen. Yes, absolutely. We've been taking excellent care of it. Are you ready to take delivery? Yes, I think it's time. Can you have it delivered tomorrow afternoon? Absolutely. Same address we have on file. Actually, no. I'll text you a different address. And David, make sure it's detailed and perfect. This delivery is very important. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, thinking about the conversation I'd need to have with Michael. My son wasn't a bad person, but he'd allowed his wife to turn him into someone I barely recognized, someone who stood by silently while his mother was publicly humiliated at his daughter's birthday party. That conversation could wait, though. First, Sarah needed to learn exactly what kind of mistake she'd made, and tomorrow afternoon, she was going to get an education that would cost her more than any luxury vehicle she'd ever owned. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my son, choosing my words carefully. The subject line read, Family Dinner, Sunday at 2 p.m. The message was brief and cordial, simply requesting that Michael and Sarah bring the children to my apartment for a family meal. Nothing in the tone suggested anything other than a grandmother's desire to spend time with her family. But what I didn't mention in the email was that Sunday's dinner would include some very special guests. And by the time dessert was served, Sarah would understand exactly what happens when you judge people based on appearances. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully in one of my nicer outfits, did my hair, and put on the pearl earrings David had given me for our 30th anniversary. If image mattered as much as Sarah claimed, then I wanted to look perfect for what was coming. At exactly 2 p.m., I heard the rumble of a truck engine in the parking lot outside my apartment building. I looked out my window and smiled at what I saw. A pristine car carrier truck, the kind used to transport vehicles worth more than most people's houses. My phone buzzed with a text from David at Premium Auto Concierge. Delivery in progress. Vehicle is perfect. Enjoy, Mrs. Chen. I grabbed my purse and headed downstairs, my heart racing with anticipation. The delivery driver, a professional-looking man in a crisp uniform, was already lowering the ramp when I approached. Mrs. Chen, I need to verify your identity and get a signature. I handed him my driver's license and watched as he checked it against his paperwork. Everything looks perfect. Your vehicle has been maintained to factory specifications throughout the storage period. Oil changes, tire rotations, battery maintenance, everything exactly as you requested. As the ramp lowered completely, revealing what had been hidden on the upper level of the carrier, I felt a surge of satisfaction that was almost overwhelming. Because there, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight like a masterpiece of automotive engineering, was the reason Sarah's laughter was about to become the most expensive sound she'd ever made. The delivery driver handed me the keys with a smile. She's a beauty, Mrs. Chen. I hope you enjoy her. Oh, I was going to enjoy this more than he could possibly imagine, because in less than 24 hours, Sarah was going to discover that the car she'd mocked so cruelly was just a decoy, a practical daily driver I'd been using to blend in, to avoid drawing attention, to live quietly in a world where I'd learned that sometimes it was safer to hide your true circumstances. But hiding was over now. Sarah had forced my hand with her public humiliation, her cruel laughter, her complete lack of respect for the woman who'd been nothing but generous to her family for years. Tomorrow, she was going to learn that appearances can be deceiving in the most expensive way possible, and the lesson was going to cost her far more than the price of any luxury vehicle she'd ever owned. I spent that evening making careful preparations, each detail planned with the precision David used to apply to his business deals. The guest list for Sunday dinner required particular attention. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, whose husband ran the luxury car dealership downtown. Then I reached out to Jennifer Morrison, the woman who'd tried to defend me at Emma's party. Finally, I contacted my old friend Carol Williams, whose daughter worked as a society reporter for the local newspaper. Each conversation was casual, friendly, nothing that would raise suspicions. Just a lonely grandmother inviting people over for Sunday dinner, hoping to create a warm family gathering. I mentioned that Michael and Sarah would be bringing the children, and how much I was looking forward to everyone meeting. What I didn't mention was the surprise that would be waiting in the parking lot when they arrived. Saturday morning brought a call from Michael that I'd been expecting. Mom, about dinner tomorrow. Sarah's feeling a bit under the weather, and she's wondering if we could possibly reschedule. I could hear the strain in his voice, the careful way he was delivering what was obviously Sarah's message. She was having second thoughts about facing me so soon after her performance at the birthday party. Perhaps some of her friends had mentioned how uncomfortable the whole scene had made them feel. Oh, that's too bad, I said warmly. I've already prepared everything, and I've invited some lovely people for you all to meet. I think Sarah will particularly enjoy the conversation. Tell her I insist she come. Sometimes the best remedy for feeling poorly is being surrounded by family and friends. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him weighing his options. Michael had always been conflict-averse, caught between his wife's demands and his mother's feelings. For years, I'd made it easy for him by always backing down, always accommodating Sarah's wishes. Mom, maybe it would be better if... Michael, I interrupted gently, I haven't asked for much over the years. I've been understanding about missed holidays, canceled visits, all the times you've chosen Sarah's family events over mine. This one time, I need you to choose me. Can you do that for your mother? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more thoughtful than it had been in months. You're right, Mom. We'll be there at 2 o'clock. Wonderful. And Michael? Make sure Sarah wears something nice. I want her to feel comfortable with my other guests. Sunday morning arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear with golden sunlight streaming through my apartment windows. I spent extra time on my appearance, choosing an elegant navy dress David had always complimented, adding my good jewelry, styling my silver hair with particular care. The dining table was set with my finest china, the pieces I'd inherited from my mother and rarely used since David's passing. Crystal wine glasses caught the light, and fresh flowers from the florist created centerpieces that would have impressed even Sarah's exacting standards. At 1:30, my first guests began arriving. Mrs. Patterson came with her husband Bill, both of them curious about the family dinner I'd described. Jennifer Morrison brought a bottle of wine and genuine warmth, clearly hoping to smooth over any lingering tension from the birthday party incident. Carol Williams arrived with her daughter Rebecca, the society reporter, who seemed delighted to be included in what I described as an intimate family gathering. Margaret, your apartment looks absolutely lovely, Carol said, admiring the way I'd arranged everything. And those flowers are gorgeous. You always did have such elegant taste. I smiled, accepting the compliments while checking my watch. 5 minutes until Michael and Sarah were due to arrive. 5 minutes until Sarah discovered that her cruel laughter had set in motion consequences she never could have imagined. The knock came at exactly 2 p.m. Michael's punctuality had always been one of his better qualities, inherited from his father's respect for other people's time. I opened the door to find my son holding Emma's hand, while Jake clung to Sarah's designer handbag. Sarah had clearly made an effort with her appearance, wearing what I recognized as an expensive wrap dress and heels that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in those effortless waves that actually required considerable effort to achieve. Mom, Michael said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. The apartment looks beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. Come in, everyone. I have some wonderful people I want you to meet. As they entered, I watched Sarah's expression shift from polite resignation to surprise as she took in the other guests. She recognized Jennifer from the birthday party, of course, but the others were clearly unexpected. Her social instincts kicked in immediately, scanning faces and clothing to assess the social status of each person present. Sarah, I'd like you to meet my dear friend Carol Williams and her daughter Rebecca, who writes for the Society pages, and this is Bill and Helen Patterson. Bill owns Patterson Luxury Motors, downtown. I could see Sarah's mental calculations shifting as she processed this information. A society reporter and a luxury car dealer were exactly the kind of connections she valued, the sort of people who could enhance rather than diminish her social standing. How lovely to meet you all, Sarah said, her voice taking on that particular warmth she reserved for people she considered worthy of her attention. Margaret, you didn't mention you had such distinguished friends? Oh, there's a lot about me you don't know, dear, I replied, guiding everyone toward the living room. I thought it was time to remedy that. We spent the next hour in pleasant conversation, Sarah gradually relaxing as she found herself in what felt like familiar social territory. She discussed her children's private school with Rebecca, debated wine selections with Carol, and showed genuine interest when Bill mentioned some of the high-end vehicles his dealership specialized in. You know, Sarah said to Bill during a lull in conversation, Michael and I have been considering upgrading my Escalade, something even more luxurious, if you know what I mean. Image is so important in our neighborhood. Bill nodded politely, though I caught him glancing at me with a slightly puzzled expression. Of course, we carry several brands that might interest you. Bentley, Maserati, some beautiful German engineering. Exactly the sort of thing we're looking for, Sarah continued, warming to her theme. We believe in surrounding ourselves with quality. In fact, just yesterday, I was explaining to Margaret here about the importance of maintaining proper standards. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly remembering the birthday party scene. Rebecca, the reporter, looked up from her wine glass with sudden interest. Oh, Carol said carefully, what sort of standards? Sarah, oblivious to the warning signs around her, launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about social expectations and appropriate behavior. She managed to make it sound like she was providing helpful guidance rather than delivering cruel criticism, but the underlying message was unmistakable. For instance, Margaret was driving this absolutely dreadful little Honda to Emma's birthday party. I had to explain to her that in neighborhoods like ours, people notice these things. Image matters, especially when it reflects on family members who have professional reputations to maintain. The silence that followed was deafening. Bill Patterson's eyebrows rose toward his hairline. Rebecca had pulled out her phone and was taking notes. Even Michael looked uncomfortable with his wife's casual cruelty. A Honda CR-V? Bill asked slowly. Margaret, you drive a Honda CR-V? I do, I confirmed, meeting his eyes steadily, though I'm thinking of making a change. Sarah laughed, the same harsh sound that had echoed across her lawn 2 days earlier. Finally! I was beginning to think you'd never recognize how inappropriate that vehicle was for someone associated with our family. That's when I stood up, smoothing my dress and walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot. Sarah, dear, would you mind coming here for a moment? I have something to show you. She rose gracefully, clearly expecting to see whatever modest replacement vehicle I'd managed to acquire. The other guests followed, curiosity evident on their faces as we gathered around the large window. There, I said, pointing down to the parking lot where a gleaming vehicle sat in the spot closest to the building. What do you think of my new car? Sarah looked down, and I watched her face transform as she processed what she was seeing. The blood drained from her cheeks, her mouth fell open slightly, and her hands began to tremble, because sitting in my parking space, looking like it had just rolled off a movie set, was a pristine Maserati Quattroporte. Deep midnight blue with chrome accents that caught the afternoon sun like jewelry. The kind of car that cost more than most people's houses, the kind of vehicle that appeared in magazines and dreams. That's not, Sarah stammered, pressing her face closer to the window as if proximity might change what she was seeing. Beautiful, isn't it? I said conversationally. I've had it in storage for years, ever since David passed. He bought it for my 60th birthday, but after he died, driving it felt too painful. So I kept it safely stored and drove the Honda for practical purposes. Bill Patterson let out a low whistle. Margaret, that's a GTS model, isn't it? Those are incredibly rare. I've only seen maybe 3 of them in person. Yes, David had very particular taste. He always said life was too short to drive boring cars. I turned to Sarah, whose face had gone from pale to bright red. You know, dear, you were absolutely right about image mattering. I realize now that I've been hiding who I really am, trying to blend in instead of being proud of what David and I built together. Rebecca, the society reporter, had moved closer to the window and was openly taking photos with her phone. Mrs. Chen, this is fascinating. You've been driving a Honda while you owned a Maserati? That's quite a story. Oh, there's more to the story than that, I said, savoring every word. You see, Sarah made such a compelling argument about the importance of proper vehicles that I decided to make some changes, not just to what I drive, but to how I live. I walked back to my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared, handing it to Rebecca with a smile. These are photos of some other items David left me that I've kept in storage. I think your readers might find them interesting. Rebecca opened the folder, her eyes widening as she flipped through images of jewelry, artwork, and luxury items that spoke to a level of wealth that made Sarah's Escalade look like economy transportation. Margaret, Carol breathed, studying the photos over her daughter's shoulder. I had no idea David left you so well provided for. He was a very successful man who believed in taking care of his family. But after he died, I chose to live quietly, modestly. I thought it was more appropriate for a widow to blend in rather than stand out. I glanced at Sarah, who looked like she might be sick. But my daughter-in-law helped me realize that hiding my true circumstances was a mistake. Michael had gone very quiet, understanding beginning to dawn on his face as he processed the implications of what was unfolding. Emma and Jake were pressed against the window, marveling at the beautiful car below. "Grandma, is that really yours?" Emma asked with wonder. "It is, sweetheart. Your grandfather bought it for me because he said every beautiful woman deserves a beautiful car." I smoothed her hair gently. He also taught me that how people treat others says more about their character than any car ever could. Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. "Margaret, I had no idea. If you told us about your circumstances, I never would have..." "Would have what, dear? Publicly humiliated me at your daughter's birthday party? Laughed at my car in front of your neighbors? Told me I was embarrassing your family?" My voice remained perfectly calm, but every word hit its target with precision. The room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of Rebecca's fingers typing notes into her phone. This was exactly the kind of story that made social media gold, especially in a community where everyone knew everyone else's business. "I think," I continued, "that you revealed exactly who you are, Sarah. And now I'm simply returning the favor." Sarah's carefully constructed social facade was crumbling in real time. The woman who'd been so confident about image and standards was discovering that she'd just publicly attacked someone who owned more luxury items than she'd ever dreamed of possessing. But the real lesson was just beginning. Because what Sarah didn't know yet was that her cruelty had set in motion consequences that would extend far beyond one embarrassing afternoon. The education she was about to receive would cost her more than money. It would cost her everything she'd spent years building, one carefully calculated social connection at a time. But what happened next would cement Sarah's downfall in ways she couldn't have imagined. Because as we all stood there, watching her process the magnitude of her mistake, my phone rang with perfect timing. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said, glancing at the caller ID with a smile. "This is important." The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Thompson, the president of Westfield Heights Country Club, the same exclusive club where Sarah had spent years trying to gain membership. "Margaret, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I wanted to personally invite you to rejoin our club. We've been reviewing inactive memberships, and frankly, we'd be honored to have you back. Your late husband David was such a valued member, and we've missed your presence." I could feel Sarah's eyes boring into me as I responded warmly. "Marcus, how thoughtful of you to call. Yes, I think it's time I became more active in the community again. David always said I should maintain our social connections." When I hung up, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's face had cycled through several shades of red, and I could practically see her mental calculations spinning out of control. "The country club?" she whispered. "You're a member of Westfield Heights Country Club?" "Former member," I corrected gently. "David and I joined when it first opened 25 years ago. Charter members, actually. But after he passed, I let my membership lapse. It didn't seem important anymore." I paused, letting that sink in. "Until now." Bill Patterson chuckled softly. "Margaret, charter membership at Westfield Heights? Do you have any idea what those memberships are worth now?" "Several $100,000, I believe," I said casually, though money was never the point. David chose that club because he believed in building community connections. Sarah made a sound that might have been a whimper. She'd been trying to gain admission to Westfield Heights for 3 years, despite the waiting list and astronomical fees. The same club where I'd been offered immediate reinstatement with a phone call. Rebecca looked up from her note-taking with barely concealed excitement. "Mrs. Chen, this is quite a story. A modest widow who's actually one of the wealthiest women in the community, driving a practical car while owning luxury vehicles, living quietly while holding charter membership to the most exclusive club in the area." "It's not about wealth, dear," I said, settling back into my chair. "It's about character. David taught me that how you treat people when you think they can't help you reveals who you really are inside. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket. Everyone understood exactly what I was implying and who those words were directed toward. Michael finally spoke, his voice heavy with realization. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you at the party. I should have stopped Sarah from showing her true colors, I interrupted gently. Sometimes people need to reveal themselves completely before we can see them clearly. Sarah tried one last desperate gambit. Margaret, surely we can work this out privately. Family disagreements shouldn't become public spectacles. But Rebecca was already typing, her fingers flying across her phone screen. Actually, Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to be featured in our Hidden Gems series? We profile community members whose stories might surprise people. This would be perfect. I think that would be lovely, I agreed. It's time I stopped hiding who David and I really were. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah grew quieter and quieter, while the other guests became increasingly animated. Carol shared stories about David's business acumen that I'd forgotten. Bill discussed the rarity of my Maserati and its current market value. Jennifer apologized repeatedly for not speaking up more forcefully at the birthday party. I knew what Sarah was doing was wrong, Jennifer admitted, but I didn't realize the full extent of how inappropriate her behavior was. By the time dessert was served, Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. Her phone had been buzzing constantly, probably with messages from friends who were already seeing Rebecca's social media posts about the mysterious wealthy widow in their midst. Sarah, I said as we prepared coffee, I want you to understand something important. This isn't about revenge or embarrassment. This is about respect. She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. For years, I've watched you judge people based on appearances. You've dismissed me, ignored my feelings, and treated me like an inconvenience. But the truth is, I chose to live modestly because David taught me that real class isn't about what you own. It's about how you treat others. I poured coffee into delicate china cups, each movement deliberate and graceful. You laughed at my car because you assumed it represented my worth as a person. You mocked my gifts because they weren't expensive enough for your standards. You excluded me from family events because you were embarrassed by what you thought I represented. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. What you never understood is that I could have shown up to Emma's party in that Maserati. I could have worn jewelry worth more than your house. I could have made it clear from day one exactly who you were dealing with. But I chose not to, because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I was just a lonely widow with no power to affect your life. The room was completely silent now, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something significant. And you showed me exactly who you are, Sarah. You're someone who kicks people when they're down, someone who judges worth by wealth and treats family members like disposable conveniences, someone who raises her children to believe that money matters more than kindness. I set down my coffee cup with a gentle clink against the saucer. So yes, dear, image does matter, and the image you've created of yourself is going to follow you for a very long time. As the guests prepared to leave, Rebecca approached me one final time. Mrs. Chen, the story will run in Tuesday's edition, but I wanted to ask, do you have any advice for people who might be dealing with similar family situations? I considered the question carefully, aware that Sarah was listening to every word. I think people should remember that kindness is always a choice, regardless of circumstances. And those who choose cruelty often discover that their victims weren't as powerless as they appeared. After everyone left, Michael lingered with the children while Sarah waited in the car. My son looked older somehow, worn down by the weight of what he'd witnessed. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, sweetheart. Sarah made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. The question is, what choices you're going to make going forward? He nodded slowly, understanding that his marriage would never be the same after today. Sarah's mask had been permanently removed, and everyone in their social circle would soon know exactly who she really was. The children can visit anytime, I added softly. They shouldn't suffer because their mother forgot how to treat family with respect. As I watched them drive away in their expensive cars toward their expensive house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with who I was and what I'd accomplished. David's voice seemed to whisper in the evening air. Well done, my love, well done. The next morning brought exactly what I'd expected. My phone rang early with calls from old friends who'd seen Rebecca's article online. The story had gone viral on social media, shared hundreds of times with comments ranging from admiration for my grace to outrage at Sarah's behavior. By noon, Sarah's carefully curated social media presence had been flooded with comments from people who'd recognized her from the story. Her Instagram posts about luxury items and exclusive events now looked different in the context of her cruelty to a family member she'd assumed was beneath her station. The country club called to expedite my membership renewal. The luxury car dealership offered to service my Maserati at no charge. Most importantly, Emma and Jake knocked on my door with Michael, asking if they could spend the afternoon with Grandma Margaret and see her beautiful car up close. As I watched my grandchildren explore every detail of the Maserati, their faces bright with wonder and excitement, I realized that Sarah had actually given me an unexpected gift. Her cruelty had forced me to stop hiding, to reclaim the life David had built for us, to step back into the world with confidence and dignity. The modest Honda CR-V still sat in its parking space, and I'd keep driving it for practical errands. But now everyone would know it was a choice, not a limitation. The difference between those two things, I'd learned, was everything. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply letting people see exactly who you've always been and watching them realize exactly who they chose to become. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Click the video on your screen to watch another story about family drama and unexpected justice. Thank you for watching.